Hey, diversity disruptors. Today we're here with Brenna Cush, my good friend. So I want you guys to just welcome her as we dive into the must talk about topic, gender diversity words and terms. Here we are in another time of diversity. We're not just talking about diversity, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about equity, we're talking about belonging, we're talking about justice, race relations. So much has changed in the last 20 years. And that's why if you're really serious about your practice, about your business, your firm, and the work that you're doing, you got to know the terms. You have to be able to speak correctly. And don't worry, your girl got you, because today that's what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to take turns, and Brenna, don't let me keep calling her Brenda. Brenna is going to be talking about gender terms, and I'm going to be talking about non-gender terms. So get your pen and paper and write it down. But guess what? Even if you don't have a pen and paper, I got a special for you. Just wait to the end of the podcast, and I'm going to tell you how you can get these terms and more. So let's kick off first. Brenna, what term do you have that you're going to share with us with our guests?
There are so many, but I think the first one we can go with is just sex, because that's a really common one that people talk about that I think is could use some more talking about.
Yeah, so define for us, what really is sex? You know, everybody likes to talk about sex, so.
So sex in this particular context is sort of the biological construction of our bodies. And we often talk about this in male and female, but there's really so much more variation. And that's, I think, really important to understand if you're working in diversity and inclusion. So we talk about, male, female, but there's really a spectrum. So we have intersex people who are not male or female, right, by the typical definitions. And really, sex itself being a spectrum, there's really a lot of different sex characteristics that have nothing to do with genitalia, but of course that's the sex that we're assigned when we're born. Our doctors take a look, they say, aha, you're a girl, congratulations, you're going to love all of these things for the rest of your life and act this way and do these things. But sex is a lot more complicated than that. There's hormones, there's chromosomes, there's a lot of non-visible indicators. So really think of it not as two different Legos. Think of it as a combination of lots of different, it's like a recipe, a very exciting, fun recipe that when we look at it as just a binary, we're leaving a lot of people out. And so that's something we really need to understand in our D&I work to be more inclusive to people who are not and who do not want to be under the umbrellas of those two sexes.
Wow. Now, I'm pretty sure most of us did not think about sex like that. Most of us were just like, I don't even know what she's going to say because it's so given that it's a male and female. And she's just really explained to us that it's so much more. So my word is code switch. And code switch is when we find out, when we see ourselves in a particular environment and we begin to adjust our language, our mannerisms, probably sometimes even because of the culture that we're in, or the religion setting. But I want to talk about it in the workplace. How many times do we and I can even say this probably happens with me, we tone down our voice, we tone down our hand expressions, or we tone down perhaps maybe changing our language and words that we would normally use, simply so we can fit in whatever that looks like. And so that's code switching. And I know a lot of us do it, and it can be really difficult. So what word do you have next, Brenna?
I have next gender, which some people think is the same as sex. And I'm here to tell you, I disagree. So gender is really it's a social construct, the construction of kind of male and female in your internal identification. So in the US and a lot of Western countries, which by the way is not what most of the world used to do before colonization, is we associate our gender with the sex that we're assigned at birth. And so we say, if you're born with this genitalia, then you're a boy and you do these things. You have these roles, you have these emotions, you have these, really, approved list of the small box of things that you could do. And then if you're born with another set, then you are assigned the girl gender. Gender really is not related to sex. So when we talk about sex and gender, a lot of the times, especially in D&I, people will get these terms confused. Some forms say what's your gender, some forms say what's your sex.
Mm.
They're generally binary, and so gender is definitely not binary. There are hundreds of genders around the world. So yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit more about different kinds of gender in a few minutes.
Yeah, so I find that very interesting because, pretty much I know I grew up with sex and gender all being the same. So you said another word, and I know this word, I know it may not be the next word you want to talk to, but I think it's so important for our listeners to hear the definition of binary.
Yeah.
So what do you mean when you say, but it's not binary?
Yeah, I didn't define my terms before I used them, so thank you. Yeah, the binary for gender, for sex, for a lot of things, it's just saying there are two distinct boxes and you either exist in one or you exist in other. There's no in between. You can exist in both. So it's really saying you have to only exist on one side or the other.
So that's really cool because you just talked about sex and there were so many, and then we talk about gender and you said there was like over 100, and then there's binary. All right. So I'm gonna let Brenna do another word before I go on. Tell me what your next term is.
I think my next one on the list was, and there's a couple gender ones back to back, so we'll get to all of them, but my next one was cisgender, I believe. And so cisgender is, in the society that we live in, at least that you and I live in, I don't know where your listeners are. Like I said, we associate gender with sex. We say that genitals are gender. There's a hashtag for you. And so cisgender is when, if you're born and the doctor says, okay, you have these genitals, you are a girl. When you grow up, you continue identifying as a girl or a woman. So it's simply just sort of falling into the boxes that were prescribed to you based on your body when you were born.
Okay. All right. So we have the gender, now we have the cisgender. So that's the sign. So I'm going to talk about emotional tax because I'm pretty sure a person who was code switching is probably experiencing some kind of emotional tax. And your next term, so you guys want to listen, is probably a person who's also experiencing some emotional tax. And so emotional tax is when an unrepresented person basically really has to do all this mental work. I mean, they're like so stressed out just so they can fit in, or they just have their guard up. They're not like, I don't feel safe, so should I say this or should I do this? Or, they're feeling this inside, not just in work, but even sometimes outside. So all that stress that's put on that person, just to think about when you're in a meeting sometime and you're the only, and everyone looks to you for the response. That's an emotional tax. Or when you have to constantly explain things about your culture that people want to know that they could just go ahead and Google. I mean, like, aren't you like so exhausted of that too, Brenna? Like always trying to explain stuff, so it's kind of like, I mean, like today someone was asking me, oh, your hair, I've never seen your hair like that. How did you get your hair to be curly like that? Like, seriously, why do I have to get into that conversation? So these kind of things can also create an emotional, we call it emotional tax because they just stress you out. The mental stress that's put on a person. And then sometimes, you don't feel safe because you're thinking, okay, why are you asking me that? Should I tell them the truth? Should I make up a story? And so that kind of would stress a person out. So that was my word. So now I want you to talk about your word because I know it links into that.
Absolutely, yeah. So my next word is transgender. And so the definition is somebody who identifies with a gender that is not the one they were assigned at birth based on their genitalia. And yes, oh my God, in this particular country and society, trans people are kind of seen as having some psychological disorder. And like with a lot of marginalized groups, they're asked really inappropriate questions because people just want to know. So, one example is, have you had the surgery? Are you taking hormones, right? There's all these questions that are A, inappropriate, and B,
yeah, so
not even, yeah, and not relevant. Like this is another thing I wanted to say is like, you don't have to have medical interventions to be transgender. It just means you don't identify as the gender you were assigned at birth. And so, yeah, definitely emotional tax. anything D&I professionals can do to create a more inclusive culture for, I say, marginalized genders, gender minorities, et cetera, is definitely going to be well appreciated.
And I think about that a lot, about the emotional tax or the stress that's put on a person from just asking those questions, and the fact of not feeling safe, not feeling safe at work, not feeling safe when you're out, even when you're trying to make that choice of what restroom to use, not feeling comfortable and not feeling safe. So that's huge. And so if you guys want to hear more, we had an episode with Katie Nees, and she shared her story on going from Martin to Katie. That episode is actually called Goodbye Martin, Hello Katie. And really hearing the story of a transgender woman and her transformation, in her transition, it's just amazing. So don't miss out on that. But now Brenda's going to give us another word before we.
Yeah, I think my next word was non-binary. So non-binary is something that a lot of people in the US haven't necessarily heard of until recently. And so they kind of assume it's new. They assume it's like a kids these days sort of thing. But genders that are not binary, so they're not, strictly male or female, have been around for millennia. They've been around throughout all of human existence. And actually many, many cultures before colonization came in and sort of enforced this like cis heteropatriarchy, there's another term, really had a lot of gender fluidity and a lot of, a lot existed between.
Just dropping terms on you guys like boom.
Sorry, we can add another one at the end. And so non-binary people do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And so some of them identify as transgender, some do not. It really depends on the person. Non-binary is also an umbrella term. And so there's a lot of identities that fall under that, such as Two-Spirit for Native North Americans, or gender fluid, or gender queer. There's so many, especially when you look at around the world. So it's definitely an imperfect umbrella term, but that is what non-binary is.
Okay, look at that. That's so you guys got like 3-4 terms out of that one definition of that term. So you better get the dictionary. So I'm gonna switch and talk about careers and terms that are put on women in their careers. And the term I'm gonna talk about is the pink ghetto. And the pink ghetto, or the pink collar, these are jobs that women traditionally hold that are dead-end jobs, or they're very low paying jobs, and they're very stressful jobs. And we just don't really necessarily have like a career path in these opportunities. We're not getting paid a living wage a lot of times in these opportunities, and these positions are traditionally held by women. And, I don't really like the term ghetto. I prefer like pink collar, but you'll hear those terms used interchangeably surrounding around these jobs. And the crazy thing is that a lot of these jobs are the essential jobs that we saw and we're seeing in the COVID-19 pandemic that are being held by women. Why women are so much at risk? Because they are still working, and they're working in these roles that are putting them at greater risk. And so we really need to figure out how we're going to protect our women, but we'll talk about that on another podcast. All right, so what do you have up for us next?
I have a quick comment in that technology, you may know this, technology used to be a pink collar job back in the 50s and 60s because it was this administrative data entry, and then it turned into profitable and sort of like the elite jobs, and now it's mostly dominated by men. I used to work in tech, so this was a lot of my...
Can you imagine that, guys? So that's like, so when the woman was doing it, it was a pink collar job, and it probably was low paying. Some guy wrote a code, put on a t-shirt. Okay, I won't stereotype, but but all of a sudden, not only it's a cool job, but it's like a high demand job. And like immediately, I have so many of my daughter's high school, college friends who are graduating in IT, doing 6 figures as soon as they graduate school. So what a shift. And we see that not only in IT jobs, but in nursing jobs, we see that male nurses get paid more than female nurses. And we see that in a lot of other roles where they're both the male and female in those roles. And even though it's a predominantly female or woman workforce, once a male or man enters that role, then that particular person gets paid more. So that is so interesting. That was cool information. All right, so what's up next?
My next term was or is gender expression. So gender expression, so since gender is very socially defined and it depends on the exact society you're in, gender expression is based on that. So it's very, it doesn't make any sense. It's not scientific, how's that? But gender expression is sort of the clothing that you wear, the way that you speak, the way you express yourself, and how that aligns with society's definitions of masculine or feminine or androgynous or agender, et cetera. So a lot of people kind of assume that sex and sexuality and gender expression are all tied together. When I was in high school, you know, like if you were a boy, you liked girls, you acted manly, and you had like particular genitalia, and there you go. It was like a full package. But they're not really related. And so there are plenty of cis women, for example, who can also be straight, but dressed in a masculine way. What is masculine? Is it short hair? Depends on the country you're in, right? Is it wearing, I have a button-up shirt here. Is that masculine? Also depends on, the fabric that it's wearing or whatever. So yeah, gender expression is just how people feel comfortable. And so a way that we can be inclusive for that is not, of course, having dress codes based on gender. Saying, women can wear pants still is saying that, as a woman, here is your gender and here's, a set of things that you're allowed to do. So yeah, not putting people into boxes based on that.
That's a nugget, guys. So I hope you consultants heard that. So gender expression really impacts in the workplace, especially when we talk about dress codes. All right, so let me see what my next one is. Gender expression. Yeah, I can see how that puts a lot of people in a hole. My next one, since we're talking about workplace, is Mommy Track. The Mommy Track. And I can actually say that this happened to me when I was consulting on a really huge project. And so the Mommy Track is basically where someone kind of assumes, because now that someone became a mom or a mother, that your career choices are going to be different. And not only do they assume that, they start to address you that way or manage you that way or manage your career that way. So here you were on this trajectory before you became pregnant. And once you have had that child and come back, all of a sudden those high projects that you were getting, no one's asking you about it. So if you wonder why all of a sudden no one's talking to you, and you feel like you're ignored and all of a sudden your voice is not being heard as loud as it was, and you just had a child, you might want to check. Someone might have put you on the Mommy Track. Nope, you don't sign up for it. There's no sign-up sheet. You just find yourself on it. Now you got to just find your way out of it is really the key part. So that's the Mommy Track. Do you have another one for us? You want to add something to that?
Yeah, I've seen that people will do this about queer and trans people and sort of make decisions on like, oh, this person won't want to work in that country because it might not be safe, even though the US is very unsafe for people. So I think reminding everyone to not make decisions for their colleagues or their direct reports, based on something that you assume about them. Just ask people what they want, and then you don't have to make assumptions for them.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. People will say, oh, she doesn't want to do that because she's going to feel uncomfortable, or she's going to be at risk, or that country will not necessarily, or that community, or that organization. And so we do have to let people make decisions. That is so key. We have to let women make decisions for themselves. I think our brains still work. They're still functioning. All right, what's next?
Next, I had sexual orientation.
Yeah.
So, orientation, again, I sort of mentioned this before, not tied to your gender or your gender identity, but that's really who you are attracted to romantically, physically, psychologically. I believe it started with the sex binary, sexual attraction. You're attracted to males or females, but now it can mean a whole lot of things. and there's a lot of them, right? The LGBTQIA2S+++. So the LGBT umbrella has some gender identities like trans, like two-spirit. It also has some sexual orientation identities like lesbian, gay, bisexual, etc. So like you mentioned at the beginning of this, there's a lot of terms, and they're just going to constantly change. And so it makes it hard for professionals to make sure we're always using the right terms or saying the right things. So definitely listen to queer and trans people about their identities, about their terminology, listen to every marginalized community, I should say, and ask the internet if you're not sure too. If you're like, oh, is this term still like, some people aren't even saying LGBTI anymore because it kind of excludes anyone outside that acronym.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So I think Brenda gave us like two sets of terms. She talked about sex and now talking about sexuality and then talked about gender. So there is so much that we learned today. You have any more before we go on? You have another one?
I will say it's really confusing that the term sex is used for so many different things, by the way. There's like gender and there's the act and there's the biology, and it's just like, let's get a little more creative with our terminology. I can do, I had another one, my last one was queer. And so queer is a current kind of umbrella term for sexual orientations that are not straight. So it's not, one person attracted to the quote opposite sex, even though if there's no binary, there's no such thing as opposites. And so some people really don't like this term because, as many of us probably know, queer used to be, it was a derogatory insult for people. Many people in the LGBTQIA plus community have now taken on the word queer because it's easy, because they like it, because it historically has meant kind of like, going against the established system of like
empowering.
Yeah, it's like, no, that's mine. And like, I'm going to define that. And also, like lesbian or gay have these very historic contexts of being like only attracted to the opposite sex, whereas queer can be more kind of fluid. So again, with terms, let people identify the way they want to. Some people don't like that word. Some people do really like it. But yeah, that's definitely a confusing one. It could mean a lot of things, but I think people are probably hearing a lot more now. And is often just used as like a blanket term for LGBTQIA, blah, blah, blah.
Cool. Well, you guys, we learned a lot today. I know most of the sessions we do, have our guests kind of talk to us about what's going on, but it's so important for us to understand how we, as we're going to do this work, that we actually are communicating effectively. So before we go, I normally give 3 strategies at the end after you give yours, but I want to give those strategies today a little different. So today we're going to take it up. I think one of the things that you can do as a diversity consultant, if you're thinking about in your business, how do I use these terms and, could this be a client offering? Absolutely. I'm pretty sure many of your clients don't even understand these terms. And, we did say that we're going to have a dictionary available for you to download and you can take with you. And that dictionary is free. This is a great client offering for your clients. Creating a gender diversity dictionary that includes these terms, the ones I'm going to give you, and even more, because the list is almost non-exhaustive. Because when your client can actually communicate with all staff effectively, then that also creates an environment of inclusion and an environment of belonging. So that's also one of the things I want to talk about. Another strategy that we could use here from these terms, be able to use these terms and call things out. So basically, when you see someone is on the mommy track, allow people to say, hey, I think you put this person on the mommy track, and this is what this might mean to their career. So when people also understand these terms, it's also a way for you can help people to grow in their career. So have these terms, start using them in your language as well. Use it in the language of your organization, in your document, or your strategies, whatever you're presenting, and make people, just get people more aware. Also, as you're making people aware, make them aware of the emotional things that we talked about today: code switching, emotional tax, getting people aware of what's going on, and then providing support and care for people who are actually experiencing these kind of situations. And also, this is a great opportunity to bring allies in. And so when you are also, so that probably would be my third suggestion, allies. This is a great opportunity when people say, I want to be allies, that you can now start training them and giving them the language that they need so they can communicate effectively in the communities that they want to be allies with. So those are my 3 takeaways for today. I normally give you after, but I'm so excited about having this information, and I want you to use it effectively. So Brenda is going to give us her hashtag, Brenna. I keep calling, I don't know why I keep calling it.
It happens a lot.
Today, Brenna's going to give us her hashtag. So we always like to ask our guests, what is your gender diversity hashtag?
I think especially, considering these conversations, I'm going to go with break the binary or break binaries, because I think there's a lot of them, not just about gender, and they're really harmful. We can exist the full spectrum of human diversity.
We just let this break the binary, break the boundaries, stop limiting people, and allowing people just to live. If we can start seeing each other as humans, it's just, just people. But I don't know, but we still have differences. So we have to appreciate our differences while we're still seeing people as humans as well. All right, so our last question is, you now have the HR magic wand. So what HR policy that would you change or implement to make the world better for women in the workplace?
I think that in this context, especially, we're talking about gender minorities, we're talking about trans women and trans men and non-binary people. It's just to really work on having that inclusive workplace. Like, it will help everybody, even the cis people, even the straight people, right? If there's just flexibility for people to be themselves, to be their genders, and then to also listen to marginalized communities, listen to trans people, listen to queer people when you're working with organizations about how to make an inclusive workplace. We know we're the experts, right? Because we've lived it. I'm also going to plug Gender Reveal, which is a podcast that talks about this completely, and it's really fantastic. I think every cis person, especially who works in diversity or in any of this, should listen to, just because there's so many perspectives that you just don't know because you're not exposed to them. And have a really open.
No.
Exactly. We don't know what we don't know.
And so now you know a little bit more. There's still a lot for all of us to learn, but today was just such a great learning opportunity. Yeah.
I had one more piece of learning I meant to say earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew this, but when we were talking about gender expression, pink was actually a masculine color up until 100 years ago, and blue was like a delicate feminine color. So if you were a boy wearing pink, or if you were a girl wearing blue, 100 years ago versus now you're seen to be going against like the new gender boxes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's all just squiggly.
So things are just, that's fluidity, right? I mean, just constantly changing. And so maybe we actually are breaking some of the boundaries. We don't really know it, but we're just crossing boundaries. I'm not sure which one we're doing. Well, thanks again, Brenna. We're so happy to have you on our show. You guys stay tuned to find out how you can download. Well, I'll just tell you. You can download your gender diversity dictionary at hrforher.com. If you go to hrforher.com, it is available. It is free. Download your gender diversity dictionary and communicate effectively as a professional. You're a professional, you should sound like one. And I'm giving you the tools, so please use them. Have an amazing day.